All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for listening to the next Harnessing Happiness discussion. My name is Dr. Eric Charlton, and I welcome all of you today this busy Monday morning. I want to introduce my guest today, Mr. LaVar Glover, and also Dr. Nathaniel Harris. I thank them both for taking some time out of their busy schedules to talk about happiness. I created this Harnessing Happiness platform as a way for Black men to talk about their lived experiences, their interpretations of what makes them happy, so that we can all learn from each other. We can grow, and we have so many different variations of lived experience, but there's a commonality to us as Black men that can help to serve as a precursor for growth, for all of us to grow. So once again, I thank you both. I'm not going to read both your bios because they're quite extensive, but I will I want to have you take the time to introduce yourself for a couple minutes, just to let people know who you are, so we can get started with the Harnessing Happiness questions. So I'll start with Dr. Harris, Dr. Nathaniel Harris.
My name is Nathaniel Harris. I grew up in Cincinnati. I went to undergrad and I did my medical school here. I went away to the University of Arizona for my residency training, but I came back and I've been working in the area for the past couple of years. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. And Mr. LaVar Glover, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, how's it going? LaVar Glover. My current role is the manager of economic inclusion with the Dayton business, the Dayton Chamber of Commerce, I'm sorry. But I'm Dayton native, grew up in Jefferson Township, and had the honor and privilege to attend the University of Cincinnati. Where I also played collegiate football there. My life has taken me on a number of journeys, and I'm excited to share that. Had the opportunity to become drafted in the 2002 NFL draft to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Had the opportunity to play for the Cincinnati Bengals as well, and also continue my career in the Canadian Football League. And so just an awesome roller coaster, a ride, fantastic journey. And so I'm just excited to be on here and share and my life experiences. Outside of football, I have a beautiful family, 5 boys, and a beautiful wife that I enjoy deeply.
Awesome. Well, we want to hear all about both of your journeys. I think they're both diverse and very different, but yet we want to talk about, happiness, and also some of the growth aspects of what you both have had to overcome and where you are now. So first question is, I go ahead and dive right into it. Dr. Harris, what defines your happiness right now?
Gotcha. So I want to say it's multifactorial. It consists of, how I view things from a professional level. Like, say, for example, am I achieving my goals that I'm setting for myself, in the workplace, in my career, in addition to goals that, I'm setting for myself as a husband, as a father, et cetera, and as well as, how involved I am with my family, the community, et cetera. And so, at some level, if I'm progressing in all those different spheres, I would say, hey, I'm happy. That constitutes, me growing, et cetera, or, my involvement in a bigger realm, essentially. But something along the lines of that.
Awesome. I'm not going to ask both of you the same question, so I'm going to ask LaVar a different question. LaVar, what were some of the obstacles that you had to overcome early on, and that either inhibited your happiness or enhanced it?
Okay, good question. Well, I growing up, as a young person, you go through the, trials and tribulations, or, dysfunctions and trauma of of family life. And so it's taken me a while to, to learn and unpack some of that trauma, and channel some of my, I guess, my outcomes, or channel some of my expressive ways. And so early on, I would say, I spent a number of years trying to channel some of my pain, some of, my hurt, my trauma, and, not really knowing what it was. And so, but I embrace it now. I embrace growth. I embrace learning. So, but growing up poor, man, that and the lack of resources. So that was a obstacle in itself. And so being able to have the opportunity to attend college and gain my education, that afforded me a resource that has opened up doors, many doors, and form relationships, which was a huge plus in my life. And so yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And I think, several of us can relate to that in terms of economics, in terms of lack thereof, and that impacting how we view our happiness, how we perceive our happiness. Dr. Harris, how has your upbringing, your background helped to inform your happiness throughout the years?
Yeah. So my mom is a Jamaican national. And so, coming from a third world country, she had a very big emphasis on education and its importance. But, granted, at the time, I didn't really kind of appreciate that how that would impact like my upward mobility. You know what I mean? Where it's like, okay, hey, like, you go to college, that's kind of the goal for everybody growing up here in the States, but kind of what do you do with that? What do you, how do you use that to kind of promote yourself and grow as a career? So that was a big thing. But also, I think what Mr. Glover had talked about, regarding like the lack of resources, where it's like, it's really interesting that, coming from a, similar environment, that you don't really know what resources are lacking until you kind of go out in the community, you see other things where it's like, well, we don't have that, or, being in high school, it's like, what are the SATs about, et cetera, and kind of, getting confronted with, all these obstacles that probably people in other communities are already kind of aware of a priori, you know what I mean? And so, but I think again, that emphasis on like, okay, hey, this is the tool, kind of helps overcome a lot, or helps essentially not overcome, but like helps with overcoming a lot of those different barriers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have a a unique background with that the Jamaican roots, very different from the traditional African American roots. So that's even widens that experience of what one perceives as happiness. So I thank you for sharing your background with that. Mr. Glover, as in Mr. LaVar Glover.
Yeah, call me LaVar.
What has you talked about a little bit about your upbringing, your background, but what has your wisdom taught you about your happiness so far in your young life?
Yeah, I would say just learning about peace and contentment. I think that having peace and contentment with my inner being, it just allows me to have a glass half full type of mentality. It allows me to have hope and optimism for the future, introspectively. And so I'm not, so focused on outside, factors, or, outside issues. But living a life of purpose for me, man, is really, kind of been my experience and been my journey, and what I've been able to pull energy from. And, God has blessed me to be able to live a life of purpose, whether it's been working with youth, working with our business community and in my role now, well, working with, people in poverty. And so that has fulfilled me in ways that really has brought me joy and contentment. Just being able to be of service, to be able to help people. And that's been fulfilling, living a life of purpose, man. And enjoying the blessings of my family and friends. I'm a relationship guy. And so I really enjoy engaging with people, learning about people, celebrating people. And so that fulfills me. Having a relationship with God, he's at the foundation. And I think that starts everything. And so, just excited about those things. Those things bring me joy.
Wow, that's awesome. You said so much in terms of different angles to how to approach our happiness. One of the ways you said was service, and I definitely want to ask you, Dr. Harris, about the work that you do as a physician, the service aspect. How does that help to support your life on purpose, your being on purpose?
Yeah, so it's very grounding in the sense that, hey, it kind of emphasizes how our lives are and experiences are interconnected, you know what I mean? And so granted, it's like if you're kind of lending yourself to promote others and facilitate their personal growth, that can assist you in finding happiness, you know what I mean? So granted, in my experience, I worked at a federally qualified health clinic. And so granted, I came across people from all walks of life and, who spoke different languages and so on, different regions and countries of the world. And, it kind of really taught me that it's like, the human experience, despite those differences, is pretty much the same, like we all go through struggles of different types, but, that in itself is the human experience. And so granted, if you're basically helping someone overcome that, you can, it helps you connect on so many different levels,
Yes.
Yes.
And the interconnected of our human experience.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to be of service and help this with this topic of happiness, talking about post-traumatic growth, because we do have that shared connectedness of Black men, of of backgrounds. And LaVar, what would you tell a young Black male, when you lay it all out, there is a human experience, but how would you help a young man who may be struggling with that aspect of what he's seeing on TV, what he's experiencing, in different relationships? How would you help him with that?
Well, first I would tell him I love him.
Mm-hmm.
Try to connect with him in our shared experiences. But I think, growing up, man, it's we're pulling from so many different lenses, I guess, and we're looking for validation. And so if I could embrace a young person, and try to just share commonalities and just let him know that he's okay or she's okay with who they are. And so let me think on that one a little bit. So I would like to unpack that.
Yeah. And that's a heavy question, because we're as Black men, we're so layered in our complexities. And I want to highlight all of our journeys, and it's very, I thank you for that, to take a step back to really think about it, because
Yeah.
it is not an easy question to impart, some of your wisdom onto someone else who may not have that lived experience.
Can I interject a couple of things?
Oh,
Because
of course.
I think LaVar really touched on like two big things that kind of resonate with my experience. One is trying to avoid what the media projects out there in terms of what defines a Black male and our ability to achieve and so on, that you really shouldn't look externally for internal validation. That basically, if you can break that cycle, the better off you'll be. The other thing is finding community, that basically, you're not alone. And the sooner you realize that and you come across like-minded individuals, again, the better off you will be. Just because, I think about, when I was an undergrad and trying to make my way through medical school and things like that, I really shut myself off, which, doesn't really sound so great. And trust me, it's not. But, that really kind of helps get rid of a lot of these external stressors and pressures, that really don't seek to bolster the African-American male experience. And the other thing, again, is having community, where it's like, hey, you're not the only person out there who's working hard and, trying to achieve or overcome a lot of these barriers. And so granted, I feel like it's perfect, because it's like, I wouldn't have thought of that, but until you said it, but it's like that's key.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for expanding on that. That's exactly what I wanted to say.
Like, you thought it.
Yeah, thank you.
Because for many of us, we are breaking those cycles. We are, in a lot of ways, we are the first, or breaking some of those chains of poverty, those chains of discontentment, that and to some degree chains of oppression. And bias. So we're a lot of us are the first to achieve certain milestones and to have some kind of level of level of purpose, or level of sustainability, I should say. And Dr. Harris, you touched on something in terms of finding community, and I just have a theory of sometimes we don't have to seek community. Community finds us. If you're aware, if your radar is open, if your antennas up, your community will find you. And so many of us were isolated in terms of varying degrees or occupations. We're scattered in different industries, so it can make us feel that we're in isolation. But I love the fact that you said there is a community of us, and shared experiences help, but you have to hear those shared experiences, or else your perception will be altered. So thank you both for sharing that. LaVar, was there in your young life? Now I want you to think back your younger years. Were you ever afraid of being happy?
Don't think I was afraid of being happy. I wish I would have expressed happiness a lot more. I think that I expressed a lot of anger growing up, because of just, dysfunction and trauma. And so as I look back on it and just experience my 25th year class reunion, I'm reflective on, how I guess my outpouring of pain. I'm reflective on how I treated people. And not that I was just this monster, but I recognized that, it was, the pain that I experienced potentially. And so I wish I would have, knew how to be as joyful and appreciative of my happiness as I am now. And so, But it's interesting. I embrace this reflection on learning. I embrace learning about, trauma and and learning how to heal from trauma. And it's allowed me to become a better person. It's allowed me to be open and transparent. It's also allowed me to be vulnerable.
Mm.
And so, which is another connecting point for people. And that's what I've used in building my relationships and working with people. Um, I haven't been afraid to be vulnerable. And so that's allowed people to, I guess, trust me in some shape or form. And so, but good questions, man.
Thank you.
Good questions.
Dr. Harris, LaVar said something, that stuck out to me in terms of dealing with the pain. Um, can can you tell us, uh, growing up, were there any painful lessons, and how did you overcome that?
Too many. You know what I mean? Like too many to count. But I feel like, it's just kind of how you deal with it. How to, like whether you externalize, or I'm sorry, internalize, the barriers and things that you have to go through, the pain, the trauma, because it's almost like you're gonna get changed or modified by, that lived experience some way. And so, do you either, kind of channel it, and granted, in my experience, I did internalize a lot of things, but I had means of learning to try and channel things, where, like, say, for example, I got into running in high school, and I really stuck with it, and I really kind of made it about, that was just kind of my means of coping, where I would run a couple times a week, and after a while it just kind of became my thing, where that was kind of my escape. That was kind of the thing that I did to bring my dopamine levels up and make me feel good. But also to kind of make sure I'm taking care of my health and my mental health and my physical health too, to an extent. And so I think that, if you can find something like that really kind of sets yourself up, just kind of like LaVar, he's a professional athlete, but, icon in many ways. And it's like, well, I think that it's like, looking up to him, it's like, well, there he goes, but, there are many other things, like now, leisure reading, or trying to find some type of hobby to kind of disconnect and kind of almost, to an extent, reflect, if you will, kind of out of that, without all the external pressures, et cetera. But granted, it's just kind of getting some type of means of de-stressing and decompartmentalizing,
Yes.
Sorry for rambling.
No, but
No, that was great.
yeah, that was perfect. It's, of course, we all have stress. We all interact with some level of stress, but I love the fact that you say this is how you handle it. And I know, LaVar, being an ex-athlete, I'm sure that was an escape for you, at times, being on the field and not having to think about, I'll let you explain it. How did that
Okay.
help you?
Yeah, being an athlete is a great you know source of channeling energy and passion, and so I'm so thankful for sports because it was just that it gave me that outlet, to compete. And at that time, man, and I hate to, be everything was about, pain and trauma and stuff like that. But no, but sports has just allowed me to really, be passionate about something, to really be able to set goals and strive for success. And so, when I got to college, man, I had some of the best coaches, some of the best mentors. You talk about community, Dr. Harris. It was a community of guys, man, with different walks, different backgrounds, of life, and just coming together, man, and really focusing on trying to be the best athlete, the best student, the best person, And so it was just, oh man, I wouldn't trade it in for the world. Some of those, key lessons and key moments and just what we were able to build. But professional sports, it's a roller coaster. Sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down, and it's a lot of pressure. But it strengthens you. It builds your character. It allows you to, overcome adversity and, hey, work on the next one, work on the next goal. And I play defensive back. And so if anybody knows about playing defensive back and corner, you gotta, if you have a bad play, you gotta move on to the next play. You can't be dwelling on, a bad moment. You gotta move on to the next. And so that outlook is how I try to model my life as well. Just, there's going to be good times, there's going to be bad times, and it's how we approach it, how we look at it, and just be thankful for the opportunity.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you. And that is, I love football. Never played it, but I love it. And I understand that defensive back and the cornerback. That's a great metaphor for life, because you can have a bad play, but like you said, you have to get up and sort of almost not erase it, but you have to make sure that you're mentally set for the next experience. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Harris, are you spiritual? And if you are, how has that influenced your life and your happiness?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that I'm spiritual, but my wife probably would say, yeah, you are. But granted, I really think that it kind of helps with grounding, kind of how you touched on, like, hey, the importance of service, and kind of thinking and kind of it framing, if you will, kind of, how you lend yourself to other people where, it's like, hey, we're all trying to grow and develop as beings, as individuals on this planet. But, granted, if you're, seeking community, and trying to build yourself and others up and bring people with you, wherever we're all going, that kind of, again, lends itself into, how do you better yourself? How do you better your community? How do you better your fellow man? You know what I mean? But that's just my perspective.
Awesome.
If I can share a scripture a little bit,
yes,
something that I've gained when I was in college, and so I had the opportunity of gaining legal custody of my younger brother while I was in college, and so that was a defining moment as well. And so as I think about some of these questions, and I wrote this down, but it's very fitting and it aligns with this my Bible verse that I feel strongly about, and it's Philippians 4:11 through 13, and it shares, I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I learned the secret of being content in every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. And I gathered that because I would always, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And that was the only verse that I would live by, I would read. But in my study, I read a little bit more and identified that beginning verse, and just being reflective on starting at with humble beginnings, and then being able to get drafted. Just two spectrums that was that made me really put things in perspective. That, hey, I know what it's like to be on this side. I know what it's like to be here, and hey, this is every growth moment is a win for me. Whether I'm, like I said, in need or I'm content, because I'm thankful. So anyway, just wanted to share that. I know I was rambling, but just wanted to share that verse that I picked up at an early age.
You weren't, and that is very powerful, because it for me I view it as a right sizing. So you're not your emotion, you understand the implications both ways. You understand different situations. So thank you for sharing that. Very, very powerful. Just want to take a second here. Dr. Harris, what, let me ask you this. Are you spending your time on what you value most right now?
Yes. So a lot of that is family time, when I'm not working and things like that. But even when I am working, it's more of kind of, as long as I'm chasing or pursuing what I view that's going to allow me to make the impact that I want in society, then yeah, you know what I mean? Where it's like, okay, hey, this is the community that I'm trying to improve. This is kind of I'm trying to improve, the health and well-being of society at large as a primary care doctor. But hey, when I'm at home, I'm dad, and I'm trying to bond with my daughter and my wife and so on. And so yeah, I am. But granted, it's easy to kind of think of all these little constraints, you know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, I need to do a better job at this, I need to be more loving as a husband, or I need to be more present as a father, you know what I mean? And so granted, really, making an attempt, is the best we all can do. But I think, again, like, when I was kind of thinking of the response, it's like, oh, wow, like, hey, it's easy to really kind of be your toughest critic there.
Yeah.
Yes. LaVar, you said you have 5 boys.
I got 5 boys. Yeah, man.
So what have you taught them, or what are you currently talking to them about being happy? Because you got 5 young men.
Yeah. I'm still learning, man. I'm still learning. You know, I try to be a good example, and I believe by me being a good example is a good teacher. If I'm living right, and if I'm being productive and of good character and integrity. So I would say that's what I try to model the most, is just being of good character, and integrity, and loving people. There's no substitute for loving people, man. And so, but as young people, they're all different. All 5 boys are different, and so one way, one direction that I've went with one kid, the other kid may be totally different, and so they're all good boys. Thankfully, my wife, I'm so thankful for her, because she does a fantastic job as well, and so it's a partnership, it's teamwork. But just showing them, pouring in love, and letting them know that I'm a source of safety and protection and love for them. So
Yeah. Now, LaVar, you said love a few times, and I can't I'd be remiss if I did not talk about one of my favorite scriptures in the Bible, and that's 1 Corinthians 13, 4-8, and to talk about when love is patient, love is kind,
absolutely.
is never boastful. And and of course it says a lot more, but love being the crucible, or the foundation of everything. So I could not say that. The interlace with love, and I think that's so important with talking to our young men, from a aspect of love, not so much judgment, but being curious and understanding them, because they do have uh, different experiences, even though they're younger. No one has, 99% of the people on this planet have never experienced a pandemic. So we're all experiencing this for the first time. So younger individuals may not have the lived experience. So I love the fact that, embracing that love aspect of not pointing the finger, telling them what you should do, but sort of, keeping an open ear and embracing them through their lived experience. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
And their experience is so different from mine. I mean, the world is different. And so just being able to hear their perspective, it drives me crazy, but just being able to listen and appreciate their perspective.
Yes, yes. I have a young adult son too, and in my head, I'm saying, why don't you just do this? Do
Yeah, yeah.
it this way. But coming out, I try to be more empathetic and try to understand where he's coming from because it is different. It is different. um, Dr. Harris, can you elaborate more about you had Jamaican roots. Can you talk a little bit more about the impact of your parents with happiness and how they viewed it and how they influenced you?
That's a hard one to really try and condense, I mean, my mom, again, who, she's Jamaican national and so on. My father, who's, is American, completely different people, but granted, it's almost in a sense what I've learned just comparing and contrasting them is that, you're how you actually think about happiness and, how your approach is completely unique to you, you know what I mean? And how one person does it doesn't mean that you should frame it in the same context and vice versa. You know what I mean? Where like my mom is somewhat insular and isolated. And yeah, even though, family is of the utmost importance, in that particular culture and community, not really so much to her per se, and my father completely opposite, you know what I mean? And so granted, it's it basically, your truth is your own and it doesn't, it's not, kind of communicable to somebody else, and so granted, however you pursue that, it's justifiable, and so granted, in my life now that I'm kind of, coming into my own as an adult and a professional and so on and established now, it's like, well, hey, I do think that family is of the prime importance, in terms of deriving happiness. But, there's other things that you should be trying to integrate into it actively, like your spirituality, culture, your professional well-being, your physical and mental health, you know what I mean? And so again, just kind of trying to actively improve on all those different levels will translate into happiness on some level.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that because you being, the one of the first guests I've had with, an outside experience. Because when you think about Black, you think about African American, but you introduce a more of an outward view on the Black experience. Is whether it's from the Caribbean, there's different aspects and interpretation, the influence of culture and how we perceive happiness. So it really gives us a lot to think about as it pertains to happiness. So thank you. LaVar, have you had to forgive someone, and how did you get over that, the forgiveness?
Mhm. Um, yeah. I've see if you told me that there weren't going to be any hard questions. Oh man. I have had to forgive many people as I've had to ask for uh, forgiveness as well. So um, hmm, yeah. So, how have I handled that? Forgiveness is more, you know, more about us, than it is the other person. And so, um, yeah. So, yeah. Like I said, I'm learning about, you know, different traumas and my outward expression and why I may express things a certain way. And so it's a growth season for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I've had to forgive, which is tough to do when you're not healed, or when you're still going through pain, and when you don't trust, or you haven't built that trust. And so, um, but you know, forgiveness is important because it allows you to move forward and to move on. And
Yeah.
so, but it's a work in progress, man. It's a work in progress. And so, yeah.
And I didn't, I didn't think I would ask that question, but both of you sort of, not, you didn't take it there, but we're having such a great discussion.
Yeah.
And I work with individuals, especially from Black males
Mhm.
who have a tough time with that, for forgiveness of self.
Mhm. That-
Um, and like you said, if you can't forgive yourself,
yeah.
that's very tough to overcome, of what's
Mhm.
been done to us, of what has
Right.
happened to us. And one of the worst levels of forgiveness is not being able to forgive yourself.
Mhm.
I mean, you start to be depressed, you start to create self-fulfilling prophecy. So I
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that. I know, we talk about forgiveness. It is about us. And
Yeah.
it's so tough. So tough.
It is, man. It
Can I
is.
touch on that for a
Yeah.
second too?
Mhm.
Because again, like kind of trying to avoid internalizing your experience, even though again, it's your experience. But I think that process, is like, hey, that can cause a lot of problems, and it's no fault of your own. Even again, if you're in the process of trying to forgive yourself, because again, it's like, hey, we're all here to learn. We're all here to grow. That's a part of the human experience. But when we internalize that causes a lot of struggle that we
Mhm.
again have to overcome. And so almost again, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's making our own plight that much more harder and difficult for us. But again, it's easier said than done. But again, it's like I very resonate with that. It's like kind of the struggles that we all go through, and then when things really get difficult, we become hyper aware and hypercritical.
Mhm.
It's like, well, only if things would have probably went better earlier on in my life, would it be that much more easier for me now? And that's never really the right way to look at things.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
again, it's just like, so that constructive, that's almost like non-constructive criticism, when it's like, oh, like, you're being hypercritical of yourself, but it's like, hey, that's not really helping in facilitating your growth. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But again, that resonates so much with me, LaVar.
Yes, yes.
Sure.
It
Thanks.
resonates from us, for I think all of us, who struggle, to, because like I said, we all have had obstacles, and not to internalize that, so it doesn't perpetuate even more suffering and more grief. So I just thank you both for sharing that. Um, I will ask you both the same question this time. So LaVar, as we move into the end of this year, we've had a long year, a lot of great things happen. Um, what do you need to take away the rest of this year to add to your happiness? So what do you need to subtract to add?
Mhm. Um, Sometimes I can set my expectation too high,
Hmm.
and when I guess set my expectation too high, I can leave room for disappointment. And so, so I would, if there was anything to take away a little bit, is just having a level expectation of people, and so
Excellent.
yeah, that's it.
Excellent.
That's it, yeah.
Dr. Harris, what about you? What?
Yeah. So I would say, if I can take away, well, really, it's not even really taking away, but it's more so kind of keeping in mind the importance of being present, whether if you're at work, talking to people, doing your thing, if you're at home, even if things aren't going, according to plan or going the way that you want them to be. You could be arguing with your spouse, but it's like, again, like kind of one thing there are many themes that were said today and discussed that really resonated with all of us. It's like, well, in my experience, I realize it's not so unique now. but it's kind of the I guess being fortunate enough to really have the experience in the first place, you know what I mean? Where it's like, okay, hey, even though things might not be going my way, forgive me, they're going nonetheless. You know what I mean? And really kind of taking the time to just really be present and appreciate any moment that you have,
I love that.
I do too.
I love that. I love what you both said. So going forward in 2023, I'll sort of flip it and reverse it. LaVar, what do you envision your 2023 to be in terms of your happiness?
Sure. Continue building my faith spiritually, just experiencing the blessings of my family and what they bring and growing. Our boys we got a boy that's graduating high school and want to be going off to college. And so he has the opportunity to play college ball and gain an education, college education. So there's a lot to be excited about, a lot to be thankful for. But just continue to build that foundation of love. And so I look forward to serving my community more and having greater impact, in my profession. And but again, I'm on this journey, man, and I embrace it of putting in the work, man, on all levels, and it starts with me. So that's going to allow me to be a better servant. So I'm excited about that.
I am too. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Dr. Harris, what about you? You're going into your 2023.
Yeah, same. It's just kind of looking forward to the experiences again that are going to allow me to grow as a physician, as a father, as a husband, as a brother-in-law, all those things that, again, it's just like, as long as I'm continuing to grow and improve, however that may be, that there we go.
Mm-hmm.
It's not kind of, far off to where it's unachievable, but it's like, hey, that's the most basic means of improvement. And as long as I'm achieving that, the rest is history.
For sure.
So because this, we're talking about harnessing happiness and the topic is happiness. And I'll ask you both this, but LaVar first, if someone were to ask you to describe your happiness in words, like a script, how would you describe it?
Peace and contentment with my inner being, a life of purpose, and blessings of and from my family and friends through relationships.
Awesome. Love it. Dr. Harris, what about you?
Ooh, you said that these weren't going to be hard. I'm like, oh, this has gotten progressively more difficult. Again, hard to say, but again, it's kind of, you know, appreciating yourself, and appreciating others, and just kind of, lending yourself to improvement and change, in any form.
Yes, yes, yes. I haven't said my script too many times within these forms, but I'll go ahead and say it now. My happiness script is my happiness will continuously grow and be shared with others because that is what life demands of me. So in another harnessing happiness discussion, one of the guests said the privilege of me comes with responsibilities. And I thought that so profound. Because when we think about, privilege, we all have a certain degree of privilege. But what do you do with that? Does it come with, do you view it as having responsibilities, and what do you do with it? So I haven't asked all of the guests about the happiness script, but I thought I would ask you two, because you have a diverse perspective on happiness. So as we sort of close out this session, LaVar, is there any parting words that you would like to say to just younger Black boys, younger Black men in particular, about how to harness their happiness, how to keep their happiness in perspective?
Sure. I just want to invite an opportunity to continue to have dialogue, such as we're having now. And so I think that's hugely important, is just to be able to continue to connect, so we can build trust, in brotherhood, build trust and fellowship. And I know there's different platforms out there, but a lot of men, grew up without their fathers or positive role models, and so that's that can be tough, man. I love what Dr. Harris said about community, and just letting people know that there's a community of us to have those difficult conversations, where we can share fellowship as men and continue to grow. It's okay to be vulnerable.
Yes.
Vulnerability is not showing weakness; it's actually showing your strength. And so I appreciate Dr. Harris. I appreciate you, Dr. Eric. This has been really good, man. And it was, a platform for us to be vulnerable, and I'm okay with that.
Yes, 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 yes. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Harris. Thank you.
I would just say, again, find community, because you're not in this alone. And I think in that, that kind of supports you and bolsters you and grounds you, you know what I mean? Kind of finding others like yourself, because they're out there, you just got to look. And again, don't be afraid, to focus and invest in yourself, because at the end of the day, that is going to have profound impacts, no matter, what that is in terms of, your health, your well-being, et cetera, but those two things.
Awesome. Awesome.
Sure.
LaVar, well, when do you feel most true to yourself?
When do I feel most true to myself?
Yes.
When do I feel most true to myself? I would say, what do you mean? What do you mean?
In terms of, well, I just say, what activity do you feel that when you engage in activity, do you feel most true to yourself?
Outside of playing golf, I'm at home there. That's a happy place.
It's all good.
But man, I feel most true to myself when I am helping others, and celebrating others, man. And one supervisor that I had a few years ago, she said, "LaVar, you are a cheerleader." And I didn't know how to take that at first. I was like, whoa, I have way more skills and ability than just being a cheerleader. But but as I thought about it, and embraced it, I became more comfortable with being a cheerleader and being able to compliment others and see the good before I see anything else, or just see the good. And so
Mhm.
when I'm at my true self, man, when I'm able to celebrate others, and so that's me, man. That's who I am.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Harris, what about you? What activity do you feel most true to yourself?
I would say again the same thing that LaVar mentioned is trying to help others, and facilitate a growth, but more so, kind of if you can going the extra mile, you know what I mean, where it's like, hey, that sharing that humanity with someone, whatever their walk of life or background, you know what I mean, because at the end of the day, hey, we're all human, but when you do things like that, when you go the extra mile, it's like, hey, you really kind of you present the evidence where it's like, hey, you're not alone, I'm there with you, here with you. We're trying to do something and build and grow together. You know what I mean? And again, it's just like, hey, this is me doing my part.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Both of you shared so many topics that I wrote down, and I just want to quickly just summarize all of them as we close. Just talking about breaking cycles and finding community and love as a foundation, service, the impact of relationship, not only with others, but maybe to a higher calling, that connectedness, interconnected with the human experience, and validation. I think all of those topics impact us as Black men so much. And it's just a constant, it's just a constant revision. It's a constant attention to how we are feeling, what we are experiencing. So I just really thank you both for sharing your experiences. I didn't think I asked you two hard questions, but the way you both talked so eloquently about yourself and about these topics, it sort of lended itself to a deeper, a deeper thought, a deeper analysis. So once again, I thank you both. Hope you get to enjoy the rest of your day, and bless you both. I really, really, really appreciate it.
Likewise.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
Thank you. Take care.
Pleasure to meet you, Dr. Harris.
The pleasure's been mine, LaVar. I mean that.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care, guys.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.